Peace and black power, peace and black power, peace and black power is the prince of Pan-Africanism, King Kong consciousness, intercontinental Ifa Tunde, notorious RBG. Brothers and sisters, I've been getting a lot of communication from you all regarding the conversation on Fox Soul, the Tammy Mack show, where we dealt with the coonology of Jessy Lee Peterson. We dealt with the coonology of Jessy Lee Peterson, his post-traumatic slavery disease. To be honest with you, I may not have taken the interview had I known it would be Jessy Lee Peterson. I would not have participated in that conversation had I known that Jessy Lee Peterson would be a participant. And the reason I would not have participated in that conversation had I known that Jessy Lee Peterson was going to be a participant is because I had already been on Jessy Lee Peterson's platform several years ago. You can watch the full interview on YouTube. This was back, I don't know, 2015, 2014, maybe 16, when I did my first interview with Jessy Lee Peterson. Ever since then, his company, his platform, his assistants have been trying to reach out to Dr. Umar for a follow-up interview. I probably get 2 requests every year from Jessy Lee Peterson's people requesting that I come out to California to be on his Fallen State platform for an interview. And I have refused. And the reason I refuse is I believe that Jessy Lee Peterson is insincere. I don't think he's a Negro. I do not think Jessy Lee Peterson is a Negro. I believe that Jessy Lee Peterson is a coon. He's not a Negro. Negroes are innocent in their ignorance. Negroes are innocent in their ignorance. Coons are not innocent. Coons know exactly what they're doing. Jessy Lee Peterson is a coon. And because I value my work, I value my time, I value the spiritual energy that I dispense whenever I engage in an intellectual combat. Whenever I engage in intellectual combat, I'm calling on my ancestors, I'm using my Ori, I'm using my soul, I'm using my spirit to address the issue. I'm very passionate with my work because I believe I was born to do what I do. And I don't like to waste, I don't like to waste God's energy addressing nonsense. I don't like to waste God's energy addressing nonsense. I don't like to do that. And that now, if Jessy Lee Peterson, if he was a congressman or an influential pastor, and I didn't know he was a pastor, oh my goodness, that is tragic. That is absolutely tragic that a man filled with that much self-hate would actually be leading people towards building their relationship with the Most High God. That is tragic. Jessy Lee Peterson is the perfect example of how black religious leadership, Jessy Lee Peterson is the perfect example of how that demonstrates how black religious leadership serves white supremacy. Now, he is an extreme example, but he is an example nonetheless. Jessy Lee Peterson has no business. He has no business serving as a shepherd of the Most High God. Jessy Lee Peterson has no business serving as a shepherd of the Most High God. He is an example of what is wrong with black religion. Other black pastors should come together and ban Jessy Lee Peterson. He should be excommunicated. He should not be allowed to be a member of black clergy. Could you imagine Jessy Lee Peterson being your child's principal or history teacher, social studies professor? And he's an elder. Jessy Lee Peterson looks like he's at least in his 60s. He is an elder coon. He is an elder coon. Some of us are of the opinion that as you get older, you get wiser. That's not necessarily true. Some of us are of the opinion that as you get older, you get wiser. That is not necessarily true. Jessy Lee Peterson is not a wise man. You can't be wise and be a coon. That is a contradiction in terms. You can't be wise and be a coon. That is a contradiction in terms. I'm seeing a preponderance of Neanderthals on my live feed right now. I am seeing more and more wildebeest, cave dwellers, genetically modified human beings. I'm seeing more and more of them in the live feed. But brothers and sisters, and shout out to Foxhole. I ain't got no issues with Foxhole. They all right with me. Tammy Lake, that's my girl. Tammy Mack, that's my girl. I don't have a problem with them, but I don't waste time on people who know what they're saying is holy bullshit. I don't like to waste time on people who know what they're saying is holy bullshit. For those of you who can make it, there will be a rally and march tomorrow in Hopkinton. Am I saying that? The place where our 16-year-old sister was lynched by a group of white, quote-unquote, friends up in Massachusetts. Hopkinton. It's tomorrow at 4:30. If you live in Boston, if you live in the Massachusetts area, if you can make it, I want to try to make it, but my schedule won't allow. Dr. Umar really wants to ride on up and participate in the march for the sister, but I'm having too many scheduling conflicts right now. But for those of y'all who can make it, please go up there and stand with the family. Our sister was lynched. They found her hanging from a tree. White folks, as they always do, are trying to treat it as a suicide. Black people do not commit suicides by hanging themselves from trees. Let me say that again. Black people do not commit suicides by hanging themselves from trees. Black women do not generally use physical violence as a methodology to execute suicide. Black women do not generally use physical violence as a methodology to execute suicide. Black women usually cut themselves and they will expire due to the loss of blood. They are wrist cutters, vein cutters, and this is women in general. Okay, women in general, they like to overdose on pills and they like to cut. That's what women do. They overdose and they cut. If you study suicide, and I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, I'm a therapist, I know this topic well. I've studied it all of my entire adult life. Women do not engage in extreme forms of violence as a method for suicide. They cut and they overdose. Now, men, on the other hand, are very violent. Men are very violent. Men will shoot themselves, hang themselves, car accidents, jump off the bridge. Men can be very violent, not women. There's no black woman who has. So as I was saying, men are violent with their suicide. Men are very violent. You got a suicidal boy, you don't need no guns. You don't need anything that allows for a quick execution. Men are very quick with their executions. Men are very quick with their executions. Women prefer a less violent means of suicide. And suicide is a very big problem in our community for black men and black women. Nobody's dealing with the suicide issue. It's the third leading cause of death for black boys to age 19, and it's the fourth leading cause of death for black men 20 to 44. Suicide, hopelessness, stress, aggravation, loneliness. That's why we're building the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy. I have a Neanderthal in the chat. We have an ice dweller in the chat. Let me get rid of this ice dweller. Every time I go on a breakfast club, I end up with 1,000 new ice-dwelling followers. Now, to my Neanderthal family, if you want to follow the chat, you can follow the chat. If you want to follow the Instagram, you can follow the Instagram. I can't stop you, but please be respectful because this is an African space. My message is to my family. This is an African space. See, one of the white privileges that white people do not normally admit to, is the privilege of invading the space of people who are less politically organized than themselves. Now, white people don't like black people invading their space. White people don't let black people invade their space. We can't walk into a white church and find out what's going on. We can't walk into a white business meeting and find out what's going on. We can't walk into a white community and go to one of their town hall meetings. We can't do that. White people don't even let us move into their neighborhoods. White people don't even let us move into their neighborhoods. That's how strict white folks are. They don't even let us move into their neighborhoods, but white folks will invade a black meeting, invade a black church, invade a black Instagram live. Like, you people you have all the power and all the resources. You control all the power and all the resources. Why can't you allow us to just be by ourselves? Why can't you allow us to just be by ourselves? I don't teach hatred of white people. I don't teach hatred of Asians. I've been getting some emails from people who are angry that I'm not out here championing the Asian protection initiative. I don't have to champion that because I have never done anything to harm an Asian in my life. I don't know of a black person who has ever done anything to harm an Asian unprovoked. Now, there's black people who have attacked Asians because they were disrespected or were attacked by the Asians, but black people don't have a problem with Asians. Black people don't have a problem with Asians. If you are going to argue that the American African has some sort of problem with Asians, if you're going to argue that we have a problem with Asians, then can you help me explain how we are being robbed to the tune of $30 billion a year by the Asian business community? Can you help me understand? If black people have an anti-Asian agenda, how is it that the Asians are able to rob us to a tune of $30 billion a year? Go to any black ghetto on the East Coast. Go to any black ghetto on the East Coast, and our community is littered with Asian businesses. The black community is littered with Asian businesses. So if the black community is littered with Asian businesses, if the black community is littered with Asian businesses, If the black community is littered with Asian businesses, how can we be anti-Asian when they've been robbing us to a tune of $30 billion a year? They damn near own the black beauty industry. The Asians basically own the black hair and beauty care industry. They own it. They own it. They own it. So how can we hate them when we shop from them every day? Most of the petty shops in the black community are Asian owned. How can we be anti-Asian? If anybody's anti-Asian, it would be the white folks. If anybody's anti-Asian, it would be the white folks. You know why I say that? And I'm not picking on you white folks. I'm just being honest. How many Asian corner stores do you find in a white community? How many Asian corner stores do you find in a white community? How many Asian stop and goes? How many Chinese fast food stores do you find in the white community? Who's really anti-Asian? Who's really anti-Asian? The Asian massacre in Atlanta, Georgia, and our heart goes out to the Asian community and their families for those women who were murdered. Condolences to them. It should have never happened. It was wrong. That Asian massacre was carried out by a white man. That Asian massacre was carried out by a white man. How did Asian hate get a black face? How did Asian hate get a black face? Black people have never, ever, ever been guilty of random mass violence against any people in this country. If I'm wrong, prove it. Black people have never been guilty of random mass violence against any people in this country. You can. When have we ever been guilty of random mass violence against European Jews? When have we ever been guilty of random mass violence against the Chinese and the Arabs and the East Indians? When have we ever been guilty of random mass violence against another people? We have never been guilty of random mass violence. But America, but America, but America, in her $500 billion a year media misinformation intellectual warfare system, because that's what it is. The media is psychological warfare. The media is informational and psychological warfare. America wants to put a black face on everything negative in this country. And the reason America wants to put a black face on everything negative in this country, the reason America wants to put a black face on everything negative in this country is America has to destroy the image of black people so that the Holocaust will not be resisted by other people. Let me say this again. America needs to kill the image. America needs to crush the image. America needs to assassinate the image of the black man and woman in this country so the international community says nothing about it. So that the international community says nothing about it. Unfortunately, we have a whole gangster rap community. We have a whole gangster rap community that for the last 30 years, I'm talking to you rappers. I'm not talking to the backpackers or the conscious rappers, but I'm talking to our chart-topping so-called hip-hop artists. I say so-called hip-hop because hip-hop is positive and progressive. Gangster rap is not. Hip-hop is positive and progressive. Gangster rap is not. Hip-hop is positive and progressive. Gangster rap is not. But we have a whole army of gangster rapping coons. We have a whole army of gangster rapping coons whose music allows them to make enough money to send their kids to white private schools while their music sends your children to prison and to the cemetery. Let me repeat that. Let me repeat that. We have a whole community of gangster rapping coons whose music allows them to live in private white communities. These gangster rappers live in private white communities, and they send their kids to private white academies. I'm going to say it again. These gangster rappers, these Grammy award-winning gangster rappers, make enough money to live in a white neighborhood and send their children to white private schools. But their music sends all of the other black kids to jail and to the cemetery. Now, I don't know what your definition of coon is. I don't know what your definition of sellout is. But if there is any definition of a sellout, the gangster rapper has to be at the top of the list with Jessy Lee Peterson. Whatever your definition of sellout, whatever your definition of race traitor, there is no way that the chart-topping gangster rapper is not a coon. There's no way the average gangster rap artist is not a coon. Because your music allows you to live a bourgeoisie lifestyle amongst the whites and send your children to private white colleges and private white academies and private white Catholic schools. But your music motivates our kids to go to jail and go to the cemetery. And then on top of that, these gangster rappers, these gangster rappers think they can come to the black community and throw a cookout. They're not going to build no schools. They're not going to build no hospitals. They're not going to build no banks. They're not going to build no supermarkets. They're not going to create no jobs except for their homies. That's it. No jobs. And they think that if they come back to the ghetto they grew up in and throw a block party, throw a cookout, give out some Christmas toys, give out some Thanksgiving turkeys, give out a couple jackets when it gets cold, and you think that somehow absolves you of being responsible for a consistent, toxic, self-genocidal message of extermination, you are out of your mind. Gangster rap and the black church have a lot in common. Gangster rap and the black church